Right now on Law&Crime Report, Brett Hankison is released from jail after being indicted for wanton endangerment, while protesters around the country take to the streets demanding justice for Breonna Taylor. Plus, charges against New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft are dropped. Kraft was charged with solicitation, but the video evidence obtained at a massage parlor was dismissed. And later, Mary Trump sues her uncle Donald Trump, accusing him and his siblings of committing fraud. Mary Trump says fraud was not just the family business, it was a way of life. This is the Law&Crime Report, diving into true crime and all legal stories making headlines. Welcome, everyone. I'm Terri Austin, and you're watching the Law&Crime Report. Former police officer Brett Hankison, who was involved in the shooting of Breonna Taylor and later indicted on endangering her neighbors, has been released from jail after posting bail. To discuss these developments, we have Law&Crime legal analyst Dina and criminal defense attorney Gabriela Gonzalez. I am going to turn first to you, Dina. We've seen so many reports about what is going on in the Breonna Taylor's case. We've seen the fact that the charge against Hankison related only to the neighbors. Why do you think there were no charges in connection with the death of Breonna Taylor herself? Many are asking why.
The main reason why is because of this intersection between the no-knock warrant and stand your ground. And there was the grand jury ultimately believed that the police officers were shooting in self-defense when they hit Breonna Taylor. But, I think there's some nuance here that often gets lost in this. And the fact is that there was a search warrant in this case that was very sloppily written and was issued by a judge. And I wish that there would be more focus going back a few more steps, because the fact that she was issued a warrant like this in the middle of the night with somebody with zero criminal history, we would all be horrified to get a warrant like this at our house. And we know that sometimes police make mistakes, right? That's why the judge was supposed to have reviewed it and signed it. And the system really, I think, fell apart in that initial authorization of this search warrant. And there's the racism that we talk about with the police system. I feel like we should be talking about, in this particular instance, more with the criminal justice system and that judge and how and why that search warrant was approved in the first place.
Dina, you raise an excellent point. And Gigi, I'll follow up with you on that point. We know that the FBI is continuing its investigation in connection with the search warrant because, as Dina mentioned, that is so important. Attorney General Daniel Cameron actually said that the three police officers, Hankison, Cosgrove, Mattingly, had nothing to do with the search warrant. And I think that's why we're not seeing the connection, as Dina said, to Breonna Taylor's death. But what do you think will come out of the FBI investigation of the search warrant itself?
I think they're going to find a lot of reckless practices within the police department as far as how they execute these search warrants. The fact that you have so many officers that were disconnected from the search warrant and its application it's troublesome, And like Dina said, you have this victim, the person that was the focus of this search warrant. She has no criminal history. In fact, she's a pillar of the community. And at the end of the day, they were trying to execute a no-knock warrant on someone who could not have expected a warrant least amongst everybody, and her boyfriend at the time, Kenneth Walker, was acting, in self-defense. And it's troublesome that the police officers get to rely on self-defense and the family didn't. In fact, Kenneth Walker received more serious charges. They were ultimately dropped than any police officer in connection to this failed search warrant.
Exactly. Let's go back to the FBI piece of this whole thing. Dina, apparently we've heard reports that one of the officers who actually was involved in issuing the warrant gave false information to the judge. Supposedly, he said something about a suspicious package that was delivered to Taylor's home. If in fact he lied about this, that never really existed, could there be charges brought against him?
Yes, absolutely. I would think if at minimum some sort of perjury charges. And I mean, if you're lying to a court, there's always a charge of perjury. And it could be even more within falsifying documents, maybe a fraud on the court. So yes, we would have to know how much of this was based on like intent or sloppiness. There's so many errors, it seems like, in this report. But yes, I would think that there would be some sort of charge brought against him for it.
Exactly. Do you think, Gigi, that we should have seen some charges, even though there's a separation here of what happened as it related to the warrant and what happened as it related to the actual shooting? Do you think that some of the police, Hankison particularly, should have been charged with actually endangering, even though she was theoretically deemed a threat because of the gunshot from the apartment? Do you think that there should have been some charges against the police officer for endangering her life as well?
I think so. And, that's the problem with the way the legislation works, is that the laws are written to protect police officers in this instance. So the grand jury is going to have their hands tied when trying to deliver a charge, because the laws protect police officers in this instance. And, I think it's a huge slap in the face that a separate officer was charged with wanton endangerment, which is a charge where you're acting recklessly to the point where it's causing a substantial danger of death to another person, except someone actually died in this case. They imposed this penalty against a figurative person when somebody actually died. Breonna Taylor died here. So I quite frankly think that the grand jury delivered what they could, but it's a slap in the face, and the laws have to change.
It is a slap in the face, and we do hope the laws change. Let's take a look at what Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron had to say about the grand jury's decision to indict Hankison.
Our team walked them through every homicide offense and also presented all of the information that was available to the grand jury. And then the grand jury was ultimately the one that made the decision about indicting Detective Hankison for wanton endangerment. I think that in terms of what happened the wee hours of March 13th, in terms of that particular or specific date and what happened that night in the apartment, I think it is unlikely that there will be any additional prosecutions that come from that event itself.
Let's change topics slightly to what happened after that announcement. Dina, after the announcement, there were lots of protests about the decision. Do you think the protests were warranted?
Absolutely, because this nuance that we talk about, the legality of the search warrant, I mean, that really is getting lost, because what people see is somebody innocent from any crime and completely unaware of even being involved in a police incident, being killed. And then there was such a delay here. If this had happened, if this grand jury had happened much closer, I mean, this happened back in March, right, that she was killed, I don't think we would be seeing this outpouring. But there's also just this frustration of them not feeling like they're getting heard, that there's and the lack of information. So the time and the lack of information, I think, really compounded here. And I don't see this ending, actually, because they're still feeling as if there was not justice. Possibly, if more information around this is released, it might be helpful. But as it stands, I think the frustration will continue.
Dina, let me follow up with you. We know that the Attorney General Cameron, he spoke at the Republican National Convention, and he spoke about the administration's law and order policy. Do you think that some of the frustration with the protesters has to do with that when they see him talking about law and order, and yet they see him talking about the charges in the Breonna Taylor case? Do you think they may not trust what he has to say because he has this conflict of interest?
Absolutely. It politicized him to an extent that I think he's no longer the right messenger for this. People right now are really feeling like politics has become so divisive, and it becomes an overarching theme here. He probably shouldn't have been speaking at a political event if he wants to be taken seriously as a nonpartisan communicator. And it is true in that press conference, he cherry-picked some facts. And people know enough about the facts of this case that by doing that, he hurt his credibility and also the credibility of everybody, including those police officers.
Exactly. Gigi, let me turn it to you now. We know that 127 of the protesters were actually arrested and 2 of the police officers were shot. It's interesting because right before the announcement was made by the Attorney General, we heard all about the fact that they were boarding up these stores, that they were bringing extra police officers in, regular police officer clothing. So they were getting ready for the protest. And yet it seems that they still had 127 arrests. That's a lot of people. And also we know that 2 officers were shot. What are your thoughts about that? Was there something else they could have done?
I think it's very telling that they went through such great lengths in order to secure the city, to minimize the damage as much as possible. They knew that the grand jury was going to return a decision that was going to incite emotions in people, and we've seen that almost every day, for months. People are upset about the way law enforcement is handling these types of cases. So they were not surprised that this grand jury decision was going to incite this type of reaction. And quite frankly, I think that they probably think only 127 arrests and 2 officers shot is a good result because, quite frankly, people are very upset. We see it all over the country, even all over the world. Cities are going down in flames because these people's voices want to be heard, and riots are the language of the unheard. And these people are doing everything they can to make their voices heard here.
Yeah, we hope that the voices are heard. Dina, we know that the shooter has been identified. His name is Lanzo Johnson, and he apparently was the individual who shot the 2 police officers. What type of charges might he face here?
Yeah, he's definitely going to be facing, they were injured, but they did not die. And so he would, some sort of, obviously not a homicide charge, but he will be charged for sure because he shot into the crowd, probably intentionally shot these officers.
Exactly. Yeah, I know they're looking at him for potential assault charges, so we'll see if that sticks. Obviously, all of it depends on what the evidence shows. They could be, raising those charges or lowering, depending on what the evidence shows. And we know that could be very different. So let me just turn to you, Gigi. Some are skeptical that this grand jury actually looked at all of the potential charges. I'm going back on the grand jury discussion for a second. Do you think it's possible that not all of the information was given to the grand jury, and that's why they came out with this wanton endangerment just as related to the neighbors, and that there wasn't any evidence? Because prosecutors, as a defense attorney, prosecutors usually say to the grand jury what type of charges they want brought, and they actually present evidence to that effect. And here we didn't see that. That's for you, Gigi.
Thank you. That's the power of the prosecutor. They are able to bring in or keep out evidence in the grand jury in order for the grand jury to consider, what they're going to bring forward. So if the prosecution was really dead set on nailing the officers responsible for Breonna Taylor's death, if they were really focused on bringing charges against them, they would have brought evidence of who shot the bullet that caused Breonna Taylor's death. They would have brought in that type of evidence to try to justify a homicide charge. But at the end of the day, the grand jury is going to follow the law. And if the law is designed to protect police officers in this instance, I have to ask, how is the grand jury going to deliver the appropriate charge?
Well, we're going to have to follow that case to see whether or not additional charges are brought as far as the police officers were concerned, and clearly as far as the issuance of the warrant was concerned. Let's take a break now. When we come back, we'll talk about Robert Kraft.
The Florida Attorney General recently announced that the state is not appealing the adverse ruling by the 4th District Court of Appeal that suppressed the video recordings in the Orchids of Asia prostitution case. Without these videos, we cannot move forward with our prosecutions, and thus we are ethically compelled to drop the cases against all the defendants. The appellate court decision was disappointing, and I disagree with the result that threw out the videos for all 25 of our defendants, because 4 other individuals also were recorded. Although not continuously observed, they were receiving legitimate non-sexual massages. 2 of those individuals out of the 4 were women, and the court said that the police should never have recorded the 2 women, and thus every video must be discarded. Although I disagree with the court's ruling, I respect it. I also understand the decision of the Florida Attorney General and Solicitor General not to appeal these misdemeanor cases to the Florida Supreme Court. The risk of appealing the 4th District Court of Appeals 3-0 ruling outweighs any benefit. The Attorney General was concerned, and we agreed, that the Supreme Court could expand the appellate court's ruling to ban hidden cameras entirely in cases of prostitution and beyond, possibly impeding law enforcement from secretly recording human trafficking, drug trafficking, theft rings, chop shops, and other criminal enterprises. Although I'm disappointed in the result of these cases, which arose from criminal investigations in Martin County, the Jupiter Police Department did the right thing in pursuing the investigation, and I stand behind the decision to file the cases.
Welcome back. That was State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg, and he was, as you heard, disappointed. He was speaking about the dismissal of the Florida case against Robert Kraft after video evidence of him allegedly soliciting women at the massage parlor was thrown out. Dina, it was thrown out because they failed to abide by the minimization rule. Everything was discarded. Do you think that that was the right thing to do, to just discard everything because they had some videotape that they shouldn't have had? They let the cameras continue to roll. Was that the right decision, you think?
I mean, it seems like a miscarriage of justice when you have 25 defendants who they actually caught engaging in criminal activity. But you have to believe in this 4th Amendment, right? This unreasonable search and seizure. And the fact is people do have an expectation of privacy when they're in a spa, and you don't want to get recorded by the government for it. And so there is that really strong tug on people's privacy. And so although it is disappointing, I could see why the court ruled that way.
And Gigi, do you agree with Dina?
In part. So they definitely failed on the minimization requirement here, right? There is a way to capture happy endings, all right? You start the recording 15 minutes at the end of the massage, and if something nefarious happens, there's your boy, and if not, you keep it moving. They did not have any justification to have hours worth of massages, especially from legal customers, and this is the exact behavior that the 4th Amendment seeks to discourage, right? This type of government overreach where they can just install cameras in secret and throw spaghetti at the wall with whatever comes up on the video and try to get them. And quite frankly, without that video evidence, all they have is Robert Kraft identifying himself. They're not going to be able to hold any of the charges there. So it's right for the state to not process.
I agree. They should not pursue it further if they have no evidence. Let's take a look at what else the state attorney had to say.
These cases were never about one individual. We tried to assure that everyone was treated the same, regardless of status or notoriety. It is a cornerstone of our criminal justice system that no one is above the law. And by prosecuting these cases and even appealing adverse decisions up to a 3-judge panel in an appellate court, I believe we have lived up to that mandate. Based on my experience in this case, I'd like to add the following observation. There has been much discussion of the racial inequities in our criminal justice system, and they obviously exist. But there are also economic inequities as well. Individuals with significant means have the ability to hire the best lawyers and investigators to dissect every decision point made by law enforcement, to find a weak spot and then exploit it to achieve an acquittal or dismissal. That's just reality. And sometimes it can be a good thing because it can protect the rights of everyone when police engage in misconduct. Here, the court concluded that police made mistakes, but no misconduct, that there was no bad faith or ill motives. The court recognized that there was no Florida law on the subject of minimization of silent video surveillance. So the court established a new standard moving forward. And this is why we disagreed with the court's heavy remedy to throw out all the videos. An interesting subplot in all this is that after the criminal cases were filed, a federal class action lawsuit was filed against me personally by high-powered lawyers who claimed to represent 31 anonymous people who were allegedly recorded while receiving legitimate massages at the Orchids of Asia Day Spa. The courts have said, however, that there are only 4, not 31 individuals who were recorded receiving legitimate massages. As a result, it's clear to us that at least 27, if not all 31 plaintiffs are non-existent. In our view, this federal lawsuit by what we consider to be phantom plaintiffs has been a tactic to pressure our office to dispose of the criminal cases. The lawsuit has demanded that we collect and turn over thousands of pages of documents and answer a ton of interrogatories that would take hundreds of hours of prosecutor and staff time. As part of this civil lawsuit, the lead plaintiff and I were court-ordered into mandatory mediation. But when I showed up, the so-called lead plaintiff was nowhere to be found. All this makes us believe that the federal civil lawsuit is an abuse of the court system, and I am calling it out.
Wow, Ehrenberg had a lot to say there. Let's break this down. Dina, the first question that I have is, he mentioned the fact that there was an unfair advantage because of the economics here, the fact that Kraft could hire the best attorneys possible. Do you think there is an unfair advantage when you have some defendants who don't have the resources that Robert Kraft might have had in this case?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm speaking not just from a lawyer, but it's true that the type of lawyer you have makes all the difference. Like he said, they didn't even have a standard on the books and basically created one based on the filings of Kraft's attorneys. That's huge. And that only comes with somebody who is high-powered enough and willing to litigate this extensively. I just want to say, too, how much I was struck also, if we remember, Epstein in Florida also received a very favorable treatment. And I thought here he did a really good job of pointing out, hey, you know, people here may have an advantage when they have resources, but our department did everything we could to not make that an issue and not let them prevail based on their finances, unlike with Epstein years ago.
Right. I think that's important to point out. That's a good point, Dina. Gigi, as a criminal defense attorney, do you agree? Was there an unfair advantage here? Have you seen that in any of your cases where some clients really don't have the resources to get the type of defense they need?
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. If this particular charge happened to someone, a Joe Schmo off the street who's living paycheck to paycheck, you better believe that he would have accepted whatever deal the state gave him and put it behind him as quickly as possible so he can get back to doing whatever he has to do in order to survive. If Robert Kraft wasn't the main defendant or one of the defendants in this case, then we would have had this new precedent where the government can just install cameras and videotape people getting massages, even though they have reasonable expectations of privacy, even though these people are not committing any illegal acts. But because there's no one there to call out the state when they're acting out of line, making mistakes, then the innocent are the ones burdened with the consequences of that. In this case, I feel like Robert Kraft's resources and privilege helped the 24 other defendants in this case.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think when you have the resources, you're just going to push as far as you can until you get a victory. And then, presumably it's not going to go any further. Dina, there were other cases like this, not just in Florida, but I guess all over the country. And technically, when all of the fruits of this poison tree were gathered, everything is going to be thrown out. And do you think that's going to serve as a deterrent to others police officers who are gathering information, making sure that they are gathering that information correctly?
I think so. And I also think that it's possible that they already are doing that in other states because, like he said, they didn't have a standard. And so the police department probably wasn't quite careful enough. But I imagine in other states, that law is a lot more flushed out. And the police departments, when they are conducting a sting like this, are much more aware of not violating this unreasonable search and seizure and probably a little bit more careful to begin with.
Exactly. Gigi, the ultimate goal here was to make sure that there wasn't a string of sex trafficking. Do you think that goal now has been sort of, now we're not meeting that goal because this case has been thrown out?
On the contrary, I think the goal is still very much in sight. And at least now you have the ability to tailor your goal in a way to actually make it possible to achieve it. Now you understand that if you want to install video cameras in suspicious massage parlors and you want to have, the camera rolling, you better only start rolling when you anticipate the actions going to happen. And quite frankly, it's not a hidden secret that in massages, the sexual acts happen at the end. There's even like a fun term for it. So, there's a way for them to achieve this goal and it's not lost in sight.
Exactly. You know what? Let's take a break. And when we come back, we will be talking about the case by Trump's niece.
Boil it down. What's the single most important thing you think the country needs to know about your uncle?
He's utterly incapable of leading this country. And it's dangerous to allow him to do so.
Based on what you see now or what you saw then?
Based on what I've seen my entire adult life.
Welcome back. That was Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, speaking about Trump being elected president. Mary recently, as you probably all know, published a book about the problems in the Trump family, and now she's filed a lawsuit against Trump and his siblings for fraud. Dina, what is this case about fraud? She's trying to say that she was cheated out of the estate. Do you think that she has a real claim there, that they were trying to keep some of the proceeds from the estate, from that whole real estate empire, against her?
Yes, this is a very complicated case, and it is going to take years to litigate. But basically, when her father passed away, instead of her and her brother inheriting the portion of that estate that belonged to him, Trump and his other two siblings were the sole inheritors. And she's arguing in this fraud case that they concealed information from her and that she relied on that to her detriment and it caused damages. And like I said, these types of fraud cases, especially dealing with real estate holdings, are very complicated, and it is going to take years for it to get sorted out.
Yeah, I think it will take years to sort out. Gigi, do you think that they will actually be able to bring this case? I know there are other civil cases against President Trump, but they don't seem to be going anywhere fast. What do you think about the chances of suing the president here and how far the case will actually get?
I think it'll get pretty far. This is not unusual behavior for Donald Trump. In fact, he has received quite a number of judgments against him based on these types of fraudulent actions. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, absolutely not. These civil cases, like Donna Dahl explained, take a number of years to develop. But if she's able to prove that Donald Trump exercised his usual fraudulent practices in the dealings with her and this will, then she's definitely going to receive some recourse in the future.
Right. You know what, Dina, so many people have written books about Trump. Everywhere you turn around, one of the former administration individuals have written books about him. But this book that Mary wrote is at the top of the bestseller list and has been there for a while. Why do you think people are so interested in reading her book?
Maybe because she is, I mean, to have a niece write a tell-all book about like this, about somebody, about the president, I think is unprecedented. Usually in this kind of instance, the family at least is tight-knit and the critics are, a surrounding, but never that close. I don't know if we've ever seen a critic that closely related to a president tell such a scathing book like this. So I think that's what people are so fascinated about. It's like the closest inside look into the president, and people want to know what that more personal details like this about him.
Yes, and Gigi, he apparently, Mary, the niece, has some sort of psychological background. She has some training, and you heard her there on the clip talk about he's not fit to be president. Do you think people will take that seriously? And what exactly does she mean by that?
Well, she's got a PhD in this field. So if anyone's qualified to opine on someone's fitness, it's going to be Mary Trump, not just for her expertise, but my goodness, she's had a lifetime's worth of studying this man, and I think that's what really makes this interesting. Not only is she so close to the president, not only does she have this personal insight into his behavior, into his personality, but she also has the education and the training in order to properly identify how this man ticks. So I think that's what's really interesting about this tell-all.
That's such a good point. She actually has identified him as a sociopath. Gigi, I'm going to follow up with you. So I think that is a serious accusation for someone who does have this type of training and something that the country should be taking seriously. Do you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. It is, it's my personal constitution to defer to experts in their fields. And, I trust experts and scientists and doctors to speak the truth. And in this case, she's incredibly qualified to make this type of assessment against him. And, I have no reason to see why we should put that aside lightly.
I don't think we should put it aside lightly. Dina, should we even be considering invoking the 25th Amendment, I think it is? Can you tell us a little bit about that? The fact that he might not be able to run the country because he is having these, these diagnoses, is maybe being a sociopath. Do you think we could ever say to the country that no, he can't serve, he's not, qualified to serve, he doesn't have the mental capacity to serve? Do you think something like that would ever prevail?
I don't think so, although as many critics would love that to happen, I don't think it would. I mean, even in Ronald Reagan's case, there's a lot of evidence now that he had Alzheimer's, or at least the beginning of Alzheimer's at the end of his term. It wasn't invoked there. That would have been, I think, a much even cleaner and more obvious way of doing it. I don't think that's ever going to be invoked unless a president is so clearly incapacitated that his whole party is really willing to do that. It's a very extreme step. And one thing, too, about her book and this legal case is that, the timing of it, is interesting because she's saying here that she's criticizing him and then she's bringing a legal case, and it makes it very easy for her critics to say, oh, she's really just angry. This book is really based on her anger, her feeling slighted, her being cheated out of her inheritance. And I think it's important to point out, at least from a legal point of view, is that the timing of this lawsuit is probably not political, and she probably would have preferred for it to have been much later after her publishing of her book to not hurt her credibility. But the New York Times article came out almost 2 years ago in about a month. And they did a huge forensic financial analysis where a lot of the information she's going to be using in her fraudulent lawsuit, she got based on their research. And fraud has a 2-year statute of limitation. That's expiring next month. I think that's why she did this lawsuit now, even though I think it actually hurts her credibility that she's an impartial, close but impartial critique of the president.
Great analysis there, Dina. Thank you. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll be looking at the case of a police officer who actually shot himself. Welcome back, everyone. An officer in Louisiana claimed he was shot when actually he shot himself. He was arrested on 1 count of criminal mischief and 1 count of malfeasance, which are counts that is not normally charged in cases. And Dina, I'm going to turn to you. What exactly is criminal mischief and malfeasance? I have not seen those types of charges. We know that the officer didn't actually get shot. He accidentally shot himself. So what exactly do those charges mean?
Yeah, it is unusual. I mean, usually criminal mischief has to do actually with vandalism. And here I think they were stretching. They were really trying to find what to charge him with, because if you shoot yourself, theoretically, there is no crime, right? But he's a police officer, and him having lied about it did create, I guess you could say, mischief, right? And chaos. And although these charges, like you said, are not common, and it seems like it wouldn't quite apply, I think they were really trying to find something with what to charge him with when there was no harm really outside him other than to the department itself.
That's a really good point. I mean, clearly he didn't follow police policy. I'm certain they are supposed to not lie on a police report. And Gigi, let's turn to you. He falsified a police report. What does that say to you about the police officer himself? They are supposed to be in a position where we can trust them, and yet he's falsifying this report saying someone shot him when in fact he shot twice. Once hit the car and once one of the bullets hit him. What does that say about him?
It says that he's a pretty disturbed person. The type of person that would lie about this incident tells me that this person entered this profession to be a hero, right? To look, hey, look at me, I'm performing my duty, and somebody shot me, come treat me like a hero. That's what it paints like to me. And, I'm going to contest Dina on this because I think that the criminal mischief charge does make sense, because in Louisiana, calling in a false alarm would rise to criminal mischief. And him calling in for help, saying, help, I've been shot, somebody attacked me while I was on duty, that sounds like a false alarm to me.
Yeah, he claims he was ambushed, and we don't know exactly who ambushed him. And, I think, Dina, for me, criminal mischief does sometimes usually apply to, something else going on. But I guess in a way, this is criminal mischief because he's claiming someone ambushed him. It's just so strange. Obviously, he did not follow police procedure. He filed this false report. And one of the things I think he was trying to do was to avoid any sort of investigation by his sergeant. And so maybe that's what the malfeasance was. Any views on that?
Well, I actually think that this raises an interesting point, because sometimes there's a vacuum in the law, and perhaps this is here because we've seen now so many instances, even with Breonna Taylor, and the fact that this warrant, had things that weren't true on it. And over again, we see the police actually lying. I mean, that's the reason why we have body cams, right? Because ultimately they couldn't really trust some of the things that the police said happened in incidents. And maybe we need to actually create a new criminal charge for lying on a police report, like a stronger one, because there's a lot of professions where lying carries a big penalty, like such as lawyers. If we put somebody on the stand that we know is going to lie, like we ethically cannot do that. It is very clear these types of perjury is a serious offense in a court of law, and we maybe need to apply something like that or create something like that within the police system.
I agree. I mean, we shouldn't have someone like this on the police force who is ready, willing, and able to alter a report, claim somebody ambushed him. Gigi, this is a big deal. I think, he is out on bond and right now, on administrative leave. Do you think that these charges should all the way go through? He should be prosecuted. He should be found convicted of these or even higher charges because he has, in fact, lost all credibility as far as, I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. This is, Dina Dahl hit it perfectly. The fact that we have to reach for, like, is this malfeasance? Is this criminal mischief? It just goes to show that the laws are designed to not hold police officers accountable for their wrongdoings. We need to design laws or implement policies that hold police officers to a higher standard, much like lawyers and our ethical standards. These are people that are trusted in positions of power, people who are trusted to uphold the law and to enforce it. And for him to use it to bend to his will for whatever strange reasons he has is very disturbing, and he deserves to be prosecuted for his actions.
Do you think, I'll follow up with you, Gigi, do you think he should be fired and never allowed to serve as a police officer again, or do you think that's too harsh?
Fire him. He should never be allowed to uphold the law ever again.
And Dina, do you agree with that? I mean, we have these police officers who we trust. They are supposed to be better than other people. They are supposed to be individuals who we call when we need help, not people who are making up reports about, the fact that somebody attacked him. And one of the things I'm wondering here is, who was he going to say ambushed him if there were no other people around?
Well, that's very scary because he would have had to make up people, and was he going to go into some sort of stereotypical person? Yes, I absolutely think he should be fired and not allowed to be a police officer. And every time any police report is falsified, that should happen. Increasing credibility and trust in police officers is essential. And again, if I was a lawyer and I committed perjury, I could be disbarred. Because we need to trust lawyers and we need to trust our police officers even more. They are armed with lethal weapons and they work for us and they work, because of us. And we need to hold them to the same or higher standard with how they fill out their information that's going to become a public record.
Well, that's right. And, right now we're looking at all that's going on across the country. Gigi, the fact that, we have all these protests going on about officers, this might have seemed like a small deal, but because of what's going on, do you think it'll take on a bigger, position in society because of that?
I'm not sure it's going to take a bigger position so much as it's going to be a point of reference for people to say, see, this is why we need police reform. This is why we need new laws. This is why we need to hold police officers to a higher standard, because they have so much power at their fingertips that it must be yielded by people who are trustworthy enough to have that power and to use it in a lawful way, not to bend it at their will, not to use it to get away with murders, not to use their power in order to create some strange false storyline that they were going to figure out the pieces to at a later date. We need officers who are trained and qualified to uphold the law in a lawful way and in such a way that encourages the citizens that the police officers work for to trust police officers again.
I could not agree with you more. Very well stated. And in fact, we hope that with some of the police reform we are seeing across the country, obviously, no more no-knock warrants in so many jurisdictions. We're hoping that the police are trained not to do this sort of thing. I have to thank you both so much, Gigi and Dina, for being here today and being so brilliant in your responses. Have a great weekend and stay tuned to our regular show.